isn't it? Okay. Senator Sobers.
Vice President for allowing me to contribute this afternoon on a bill entitled an Act to amend the Copyright Act Chapter 8220 to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on audiovisual performances. Mr. Vice President, first, I would like to bring greetings to all our nurses in Trinidad and Tobago and the world at large. I understand today is International Nurses Day, and especially during this pandemic period that we are experiencing worldwide, our nurses are extremely essential to the fight against the coronavirus, and I would definitely like to pay homage to them because they do a lot of hard work within the hospital and elsewhere. And I don't think much is ever said in terms of the stellar work that they bring in terms of the relief to persons within our country and the world at large. Mr. Vice President, a lot has been said on this particular bill on copyright and intellectual property on the whole. And I must admit, I myself, as a practicing attorney, would have had some brushes with respect to intellectual property and copyright, which gave me somewhat of a first-hand working knowledge of some of the situations involved and present within our own format within Trinidad and Tobago, and as far as Latin America with respect to some of the other countries and even in Panama. And in terms of conducting research and looking at the Marrakesh Treaty and even the Beijing Treaty and doing some reading on the insatiable will for persons who may be disabled to want to learn, to want to be educated, to be seized of information that would not have been normally brought to them based upon some inconsistencies with respect to its presentation. I think that this is a proper forward step in the right direction to bring about relief to those persons within that category. And I think for far too long, many of us have discounted the number of persons, as identified by Senator Mark and others within this chamber, within our own country, who fall within that category, disabled or otherwise, who would not have been the beneficiary of good pieces of literature or good pieces of production and performance based upon their disability. And this bill squarely brings in line an operation to give those persons that opportunity to benefit from such literature and artwork and art form. Looking at the bill in particular, I agree with the majority of what has been said in terms of the fact that there's nothing really objectionable to the contents of the bill. And in terms of my research and in terms of conversations had with many other persons who are champions within this field, I also would like to pay homage and due respect to Senator Anthony Vera. His name has come up several times within this debate and several times within conversations with many persons involved in the intellectual property field and in the liberal arts, and the work that he's done to champion the cause of many persons within that field. But as I looked at the bill, there was one or two parts of the bill that I just had a bit of a concern with. In particular, at page 7 of the bill, what would be clause 5 seeks to amend section 12 by introducing a new section 12A within the Primary Act. And that particular section allows for institutions by order of the minister, designated by the minister, to depart from the restrictions originally located within section 8 of the Act, and allows for libraries or archives to reproduce work without first seeking permission from the owner once it is designated for non-profit. But in particular, section 12A, this new section 12A under clauses 2B and 2C speak about reproduction and distribution to communicate to the public by any means or lend an accessible format copy or supply the accessible format copy to another authorized entity or to a beneficiary person. And when I looked at section 8 itself, section 8 had a bit of a restriction in terms of the amount of copies that could have been made. It specifically stated that it would have only been for one copy. Now I understand, because we are speaking about mass distribution, that we may very well need to depart from what was contained further in the parent legislation. But I would have just wanted a bit of clarity, maybe in winding up the Attorney General could address that. I also was a bit concerned with respect to some of the checks and balances that the ministry or the designated authority would have in terms of reproduction of the actual works themselves and the policing of the non-profit basis of some of these entities or organizations. I would have heard in contributions that the designated entity with respect to this particular section was NALIS. But if other entities should arise from time to time, I was not too happy or convinced, even though somewhat of a procedure is laid out under section 3, subsection 3 of this new 12A, I was not too convinced that enough strictures were in place or enough of a procedure was in place by the ministry, whichever ministry it may be, to police the actual non-profit aspect of these organizations. Because it would really be disheartening to learn that some of these organizations would be reproducing works and actually procuring profits from the works that was actually reproduced. Apart from that, Mr. Vice President, I listened also to what Senator Obika had to say, and it made me think, especially in terms of my research, about a matter that I myself was involved in terms of making an application before the Magistrates Court for a dancehall license. And these dancehall licenses are usually applied for, as the name suggests, if you're having a party or a fete or something like that and persons would be in attendance, you have to have a license for the event to take place. And one of the requirements for getting the license is that you should have a court approval. So you would go to court, indicate to them what the event would be about, and they would give you the necessary approvals after whatever is sorted and paid with them. For this specific event, the license that was procured was not from CUT, and it was actually from the TTCO. And when I presented the documentation in court, I was informed by the learned magistrate then that I had the wrong license, that I had the wrong letter from the organization, and I was supposed to get it from CUT. And the magistrate went on to admonish me by indicating they never hear anything about no TTCO, it's CUT, and CUT, and CUT, and CUT, and CUT, and CUT, full stop. And we had to go back and forth at length to explain that unfortunately in Trinidad, that aspect of copyright is not regulated as it should be, in that there is not just one organization treating with these issues. And so I became aware thereafter that there are many matters before the High Court right now treating with issues like that, where different entities would lay claim over intellectual rights by artists, and the level of confusion involved by persons when they're having these events with respect to who they should pay whatever royalties and pay whatever monies to. So that is something that I would agree with Senator Obika with, that maybe at some other point in time with respect to another amendment that could be made, that we deal or treat with regulating these entities, so that maybe there's one actual entity that persons who are involved in the art form could pay their licensing to. In my reading as well too, I was concerned about the level of enforcement. I know that Senator Mark would have touched on that as well. And many persons within our society would reproduce artwork without actually understanding that there should be some compensation paid to the individual, the artist, who produced the work originally. And whether it be just like we had the advent of the Domestic Violence Unit as an arm of the TTPS, the majority of matters that find themselves before the Magistrates Court with respect to prosecution of persons who may have a dubbed CD, as it may be, or a burned CD or whatever, or if you go on any one of these streets within Port of Spain or San Fernando and you have persons playing music and they don't have the requisite permission, some of these persons are actually prosecuted. And in some instances, there's a gap with respect to education in terms of paying the proper permission fees and whatnot. But those are some concerns that many persons within the organization had with respect to actual enforcement, that there's not enough that is being done to enforce the regulations themselves. And then there's also the conversation about the advent of other types of reproduction internationally of the work that is done here in Trinidad and Tobago. We as a country and as a society should feel exceptionally proud about soca music and parang and carnival and other types of literary and other types of production that emanates specifically from Trinidad, that unfortunately find its way on YouTube. And there's no sort of compensation paid to our artists when the music and whatnot is found on YouTube. And in other countries, international countries, there's policing of those things on this big international site like YouTube. So it is an opportunity for us to consider getting involved as well too, so that we can have some type of compensation paid to artists from these international organizations. As a matter of fact, in my discussions with persons from COT as well too, I was surprised to learn, and I would not have heard anyone else mention it, that persons can actually operate their own internet radio, unbeknownst to many of us. I was under the opinion if you had to get a radio license, you would have to apply through the necessary broadcasting. And this is the thing. So persons are actually operating internet-based radio stations where they stream pirated music and other forms of art form without any policing to that whatsoever. And I am told that apart from pirating work done by our performers and whatnot, there's also a lot of inflamed messages being sent out on these internet radio stations that should be policed in some way, form, or fashion. So we have in fact come a long way, I think, from days gone by in terms of recognizing that there's a certain degree of authority that should be placed with respect to works being done by persons in the art forms and whatnot. I would like to see a little bit more done on the side of enforcement. And as a matter of fact, if we are to look at even some degrees of enforcement on the intellectual property side, I am aware in certain countries like in Panama, that is something that is seriously policed, Mr. Vice President. In Panama, there's an actual intellectual authority that has been set up for some time now, and many law firms have been retained by big corporations like Disney and DreamWorks to police these situations in Panama. And the intellectual authority in Panama works hand in hand with the customs unit across there. So when goods come into the ports, containers are randomly searched, and if there are goods that are found to be in contravention, the owners of the containers are asked to produce their license agreement with these large multinational corporations. And if they aren't, then there's legal action taken by the law firms within Panama City that represent these multinational corporations, sometimes resulting in extreme fines that have to be paid by the owners of the goods within the containers, and the goods are eventually also destroyed. In most instances, if persons are not citizens to Panama, because Panama is a huge transshipment point as well to the ports of Balboa and etc., there can be bans, importation bans placed against the names of the individuals, so that those goods, that individual could never ship through Panama's port again. So these are some of the suggestions that I think we could look at in terms of enforcement within the very near future. Apart from that, I think the bill is well intentioned. It meets the mettle with respect to the ethos of the legislation itself, bringing release to so many persons within our country and worldwide who would want to benefit from artworks, some beautiful artwork that come out of Trinidad and Tobago.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes, and I would welcome the passing of the legislation. I think all of us within this House recognizes how important this particular piece of legislation it is, and would definitely give our support to finally having it named, etched within our law books in Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Dialsing.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to speak on this bill. I must say, I realize this bill has 3 aspects, really. It's trying to incorporate the Marrakesh Treaty and the Beijing Treaty into the existing copyright law, as well as look at the limited circumstances of acts that, that may be authorized by limitation exceptions. And Senator, good Senator on the other side, actually, Senator Rambarat went into details of the last one, so I wouldn't go into that aspect. Mr. Vice President, WHO estimates about 1.3 billion persons have some sort of visual impairment. And our Central Statistical Office also quotes about 19,540 persons in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's a lot of persons here. And the thing we have to appreciate is Trinidad has a lot of diabetics in our population, about 14.5%, hypertensive, we have glaucoma, we have our aging population is increasing. We are described as an aging nation, and there's something called macular degeneration where suddenly you cannot see because your retina somehow loses certain points where the light comes in, and that is age-related. So we are expecting that the problems with visual problems will increase. We are expecting that. So therefore, this piece of legislation actually takes into account our health issues in Trinidad and Tobago, and more so it takes into account the fact that it brings comfort to the fact that that treaty that was introduced years ago has finally now seen fruit in our Senate. And we, as I said, thanks was given to Senator Vera for the efforts he made, and then for Reagan Ascarali for the copyright laws that he put in. And I'm saying that the Attorney General must be thanked for bringing this piece of legislation. And as we were reminded by Senator Wade Back, the previous government, the UNC government, actually introduced it. They opened the door It was pushed further by the Attorney General by coming here, but we need to push it a little further because, you see, while we have this excellent piece of legislation which will give rights to persons, we find that, analysis has the capability of helping. If a visually impaired person has to walk down Frederick Street to try to, have that aspect of crossing, going to certain government buildings, there's still some deficiencies. So, yes, Attorney General, we have reached a good way, but I'm hoping with your trust we can now expand what's out there for the benefit of the visually impaired. You see, about 20 years ago, Mr. Vice President, I lost vision on my left eye. I had what you call a giant tear retinal detachment, and I had to go to Bascom Palmer. So I know what it is like to have loss of vision in one eye. So I have no lens in this eye, and I have a silicone ring inside it. So therefore, I know that eventually, I may get macular degeneration, my sight may go further. And I'm pleased to have this piece of legislation in front of us today. And you see, we have to appreciate, in this time of COVID lockdown, it is needed. Persons are reaching out for books, persons are reaching out for certain sort of information, in the internet. Now we have to provide it also for our population that are visually impaired. And we found that only 5% of all published books are available in developed countries, and 1% in developing countries that are available in a format that can help the visually impaired. So, really speaking, the wealth of information out there is denied to the visually impaired. So therefore, this bill was long in coming, and I think that the idea that we have this bill here today shows that a commitment and the fact that we can go further along with. Now, my take on this, Mr. Vice President, this Marrakesh Treaty, it years ago when they had that, the meetings to kind of formulate the treaty to see how they are going to utilize the existing laws in the country, the copyright laws, to bring this in. There was some hesitation because you see, what this also does, it also is a disadvantage to somebody who writes a book, an author. If I am an author and I spend my time, my effort, my money, and I publish my book, and all of a sudden you say you want to take my book and you want to, disperse it without any sort of benefits to me, it may put me at a disadvantage. But this treaty actually got countries to buy in, and there were some countries who actually had reservations, with this. Some European Union countries also appear to be, having some reservations. Some other countries had benefits in place already. Luxembourg didn't need any sort of new laws because they already had existing laws there. And you found that some European countries opted to at least have something called accessibility tax to somehow get a little benefit for the persons who would be the authors who, would have given their effort into producing this. Other countries opted for a scheme of compensation for rights holders. So it's really looking at a balancing act. Rights holders who have the right, the copyright, the producer work, balancing this with the availability to give this sort of a leeway to persons who are visually impaired. So therefore, it's really a human rights issue where you look at the principles of non-discrimination, equal opportunity, accessibility, participation, and inclusion in society. And this is outlined in the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UN Convention to which we, Trinidad and Tobago, is a member. So then, when you're looking at the limitation of these rights, that you're taking some rights away, you see, the Balancing Act had to be there, where you need to maintain a balance between the effective protection of the rights of the authors and the larger public interests, particularly education, research, access to information, and that such a balance must facilitate effective and timely access to works for the benefits of persons with visual impairments or with other print disabilities. So therefore, the Balancing Act was there. Some countries took a while to come on board, and other countries, would have said, listen, the rights of the authors, copyright laws, we don't want to touch that. But the long and short of it, it is something that is beneficial to the visually impaired. It is something that as a humanistic sort of laws, a treaty. And it shows really that certain countries are willing to get together in solidarity for the rights of the individuals. And I think this is something important that we have to look at. The fact that there's a global cooperation among countries, a solidarity for those visually impaired, shows that it can open the way for other avenues of solidarity. So I must say, Mr. Vice President, the fact that this treaty has now found its way into our law books is something to be commended, and it is something that I see that was needed. And I have to congratulate the Attorney General for this. I say it took a while to come. There were, the Marrakesh Treaty was adopted on June 27, 2013, and Trinidad and Tobago actually signed on. And even, so it took a while to be here, but eventually it is here. Because, so when we looked at this treaty, we see the need, we see the fact that it is here, and we see there's the benefit to our citizens who are visually impaired. Now, a similar argument came about, came to the forefront when persons were looking and said, but couldn't the governments of the different governments, couldn't they pay some sort of copyright to the authors? But I guess looking at the world economy, looking at the need for these literature to be out there, this, I think, it's a good time, and I think it is beneficial. And we have to thank also NALIS for doing such a wonderful work, because NALIS, I think it was mentioned by one other speaker, is one of the authorized persons in Trinidad and Tobago. But NALIS, since 2001, NALIS had training programs for the visually impaired. So we had, the fact is that Trinidad and Tobago, we were well, in sync with trying to help the visually impaired. And in 2004, NALIS was named the winner of the Prime Minister's Improving for Service Excellence Award, making a difference to the people, and the Social Inclusion Award. So NALIS actually helped the VIPs, the visually impaired person. And actually, persons are proud to go to there where they can actually get their, a JAWS, which is a job access with speech. So kudos to NALIS, and again, now we have given them more power, more teeth, more funding probably to expand their services. And I'm saying by doing this, we are actually empowering our visually impaired persons. So gone are the days when they may have to just make a basket. Now they can actually go there, have the capability to go university, have the capability to teach their children from this. So we have gone a long way in this, and this is something to be commended. When I looked at the Beijing Treaty, it's a similar sort of situation, but in this treaty, Mr. Vice President, we looked at the Treaty on Audiovisual Performance, where it's a multilateral treaty acknowledging for the first time the intellectual property rights of performers with regard to their audiovisual performance, and it was adopted in 2012. Now the thing is, I am not sure about these treaties. I know with this first treaty, the Marrakesh Treaty, it can come on board because we got the requisite number, I think, of 20 persons. But I'm looking at this other Beijing Treaty, and you have to get this treaty to actually come, to actually have a startup process. You need to have certain members. So we got it for the Marrakesh Treaty, but with this treaty, I think Trinidad and Tobago was the 20th member of the Beijing Treaty, and I think they needed 30 members. So I'm thinking if we are still missing persons, I'm not sure, we may have to see if the government could use its influence among any sort of CARICOM neighbors to try and push this to get this in. Because you see, this treaty will actually help the rights and of the audiovisual performer. So you found that this treaty had its, the Beijing Treaty actually, it was conceptualized from a Rome Convention treaty where they looked at audio, more audio performances and copyrights for that, and freeing up the audio and giving the copyrights for the audio producers. But you see, this piece of legislation is an improvement from the Rome Convention that existed. Because before the Beijing Treaty and audiovisual performance, had limited international protection for their performances and did not have the same rights previously accorded to authors, performers, and producers of sound recording. So there is an improvement in that from the 1961 Rome Convention for the protection of performance. And I'm thinking that the fact that this piece of legislation here, it is needed in this time again, where persons may not be able to go out and perform. They may not be able to go out and have a live show. And that in this COVID time, this piece of legislation would definitely help those people to get certain benefits that, you know, they can look and get it. So they can be at home and still gain in some sort of benefits. So it is, again, needed. It came in the right time. And this Beijing Treaty actually gives them economic rights, which will give audiovisual performance leverage in enabling them to authorize the use of their performance against the promise of a fair compensation. Moral rights, which would enable them to have control over the use of their images and likeness and distortions of their performance. Now, distortion of their performances. We know social media, there's a lot of memes. So you may have a calypsonian singing something and they may have put some other voice in it and it may embarrass him. He may now have an opportunity where he can say, listen, this now goes against this piece of legislation here. So besides the economic rights, the moral rights, you know, and besides the fact that it actually provides the employment opportunity for local performances, performers, technicians, musicians, and other creators. I'm thinking it has come at an opportune time, and it is, in fact, welcomed, I think, to the performers out there who have actually expressed to me that this piece of legislation, they are very thankful for it, because Trinidad has a creative spirit. We have a lot of persons who sing chutney, calypso, whatever, and you can
Senator, you have
get
5 more minutes.
Thank you. You can get that performances that they have and actually encourage them, stimulate the market, actually enhance their ability to perform. So, as I close, Mr. Vice President, I thank the government for bringing this legislation now. I thank the opposition for introducing it before. And our own senator here, Senator Vera, who actually pushed for it. And all in all, this level of comradeship to bring this piece of legislation, it's a good message we are sending out to people, a positive message in this time of COVID, that we are all on all the sides cooperating for this. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Minister of Communications.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I'm particularly elated to be given the opportunity to join this debate today, as it impacts on a very integral yet often overlooked aspect of our service to humanity: the ability to bring a level of print equity to those who are visually impaired. This amendment to the Copyright Bill acknowledges that there is a significant sector of our community who, for no reason of their own, has been denied access to the storehouse of literature, so often taken for granted by others. Mr. Vice President, one of the effects of this COVID-19 experience is the necessity of persons whose jobs have been deemed non-essential to stay at home. And while many are chomping at the proverbial bit to get out, there are many who are enjoying this time and using it to slow down, to appreciate what is truly important in their lives, and to rebalance their lives. Many have found that one simple way of doing that is simply to read, to begin reading again, to begin reading for leisure, or to bring themselves up to speed on the latest developments in their profession or hobby. Even if they do not physically possess or own the literature, there are thousands who have been able to access the resources owned and managed by the National Library and Information Systems Authority, NALIS, during this period of pandemic. Possession of a NALIS library card, Mr. Vice President, particularly in these times, has been the passageway to a world of literary resources made available online. As an aside, if there is anyone here in this august chamber who is not in possession of a NALIS library card, speak with me after. I think that you need to have a NALIS library card. In times like these, one of the valuable things in your wallet should be an Alice library card. Mr. Vice President, unfortunately, those who are visually impaired have no such luxury, and to date, they remain unable to access any such material that is not produced specifically for their use. And that in its simplest form is what we are seeking to remedy here today. Our national anthem speaks of a society that is equal in all respects. Our country's mantra, together we aspire, together we achieve, speaks of us being able to envision a way of life that takes into account the hopes and dreams of every citizen. But you and I know that equality and equity are two completely different concepts. And while everyone has equal access to the library, the visually impaired cannot use the books to which they have equal access, unless they have been reproduced in a Braille format. The Marrakesh Treaty, to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, presents an unprecedented opportunity for access to printed works for blind and other print handicapped persons. Together with the Vision Treaty, which we will also be discussing today, but I will be focusing more on the visually impaired, a horizon of hope has been opened up for all our visually impaired or print handicapped persons. And this copyright amendment bill seeks simply to level the playing field, also by declaring NALIS as the authorized entity to convert previously inaccessible material to that which can be used by the visually impaired. It is important to understand the relevance of these two treaties, and I heard Senator Dial Singh speak about the Beijing Treaty and Marrakesh. And I just want to say a few words about it. The Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performance is a multilateral treaty which regulates copyright for audiovisual performances. And this treaty was adopted by the Diplomatic Conference on the Protection of Audiovisual Performances, which took place in Beijing in June 2012. The treaty outlines global standards, acknowledging the right of audiovisual performers to be compensated fairly for the use of their creative contributions. It grants performers economic rights to improve their livelihood, as well as moral rights, giving them the ability to protect their images. And the treaty protects the rights of performers in audiovisual works such as film, TV series, musicals. And there are some benefits, of course, to this treaty, and it is the protection of performers in a digital era. It modernizes and updates for the digital era, the protection of singers, musicians, dancers, and actors in audiovisual performances contained in the Rome Convention that I just heard Senator Dial Singh speak about. It safeguards the rights of performers. Another benefit of this treaty includes safeguarding of the rights of audiovisual performers from the unauthorized use of their performances in various audiovisual media. It improves the status of audiovisual performers by providing incentives and compensation with regards to the international use of their performances. So this Beijing Treaty will strengthen the standing of performers in the audiovisual industry. Another benefit is the protection of culture, folklore, and cultural diversity. It contributes to the protection of traditional cultural expression and national folklore. Economic development. It will contribute to safeguarding the rights of performers against the unauthorized use of their performances in audiovisual media such as film, TV, and video. Additionally, the treaty can foster an increase in investment by encouraging effective and well-enforced copyright legislation, which will be conducive for accessing foreign markets. So, Mr. President, I speak about Marrakesh Treaty now. The main goal is to increase the availability of accessible formats of published materials, including books and magazines and print, to disabled persons across borders. According to the World Health Organization, in 2017, it was estimated that 253 million persons worldwide had a form of vision impairment, including those who are blind. And our Trinidad and Tobago statistics, which was taken from Desiree Murray, a lecturer in ophthalmology, University of the West Indies, in 2017 also, states that approximately 13,000 individuals in Trinidad and Tobago are blind, with 32% glaucoma, 29% cataract, diabetic retinopathy, 13%, together accounting for 74% of blindness. Uncorrected refractive error accounts for 46% of moderate and severe visual impairment. And this is in 2017. The treaty has a humanitarian and social development dimension and creates a set of mandatory limitations and exceptions for the benefit of the blind, visually impaired, and otherwise print disabled, called VIPs. The benefits: it provides greater access to education, of course, because the treaty aims to increase access to books, magazines, and other printed materials for persons with print disabilities by providing them with alternative format of these materials, thus leveling the playing fields for access to materials that were not readily available to visually impaired persons. Access to educational materials in accessible formats is essential to enable persons to pursue educational opportunities that they would not have been able to pursue in the past. This means that 13,000 of Trinidad and Tobago's visually impaired community will now have access to educational material that once was unavailable to them. Enhanced social integration and cultural participation. Having equal access to common sources of knowledge and information is crucial, not only for learning, but also for social inclusion and cultural participation. By improving access to both educational and leisure materials, the Marrakesh Treaty facilitates greater inclusiveness and participation by persons with print disabilities in the cultural and social life of the communities. Poverty alleviation and increased contributions to the national community. By providing access to learning materials in accessible formats, of course, learning is a powerful tool for poverty alleviation. It provides persons with print disabilities opportunities for professional growth, allowing them to contribute to their local economies and become economically self-sufficient. There's also the improved awareness of the challenges faced by print-disabled community persons with disabilities. And the Marrakesh Treaty is an instrument that fosters discussion and raises awareness about the need for policies that benefit persons with disabilities. And today we are here debating this bill, which of course would give our visually impaired persons such a great opportunity that is needed. I will move to, so therefore, I'll go to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, acceded to both the Marrakesh and Beijing treaties in October 2019, and the proposed amendments to the Copyright Act, which we debate today, will give light and life to an otherwise darkened area of our engagement with the visually impaired community. The treaty sets a clear objective. A print disability should not preclude a person's ability to exercise his human right to access to information, research, and culture. And to protect this right, government must create exceptions allowing the making and sharing of accessible format copies of works for individual beneficiaries without their needing to clear rights for non-commercial purposes. Librarians often speak of the freedom to read. However, for those who are blind or otherwise print disabled, obtaining reading materials in an accessible format can be a struggle. And Mr. Vice President, that in a nutshell is what today's debate is about. And if we share the view of former Secretary General of the United Nations and Nobel Peace Prize recipient Kofi Annan, that literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. And then what we do here today is to offer hope to thousands of persons who would have been denied access to these copyrighted material. The Marrakesh Treaty has already had a major impact on copyright legislation, removing legal barriers to making and sharing copies of books in accessible formats, but to ensure that people with print disabilities benefit from genuinely equal access. Implementation, of course, is the key. When this treaty was signed 5 years ago, it was celebrated as a major step towards fair access to information for persons with print disabilities. It addressed the book famine, as they would call it, the serious lack of books and other materials in accessible format for visually impaired persons. And a key factor behind this was copyright. To make a copy of an accessible format, persons with print disabilities and the institutions that serve them, libraries in particular, needed to seek authorization from right holders. Meanwhile, right holders, who are often publishers, were not producing such copies themselves, leaving millions of persons without access. So the treaty compels its members to remove these barriers, allowing for the making and sharing of accessible format books, including across borders. So since Trinidad and Tobago's access to the treaty in October 2019, Mr. Vice President, the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office has been working with NALIS and the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association, as well as publishers, to ensure that NALIS is ready to begin implementation once this amendment to the Copyright Act has taken place. Historically, the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association has collaborated with NALIS for the purpose of providing access to material in all types of formats for visually impaired persons. And I just want to say that I heard just before that Senator Dialsing commending NALIS for I'm happy that he has recognized the work that they have been doing with the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association. Having regard to the shared objective between the TTBWA, which is Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association, and NALIS, to provide accessible content to persons who are blind, visually impaired, print disabled, the TTBWA and NALIS have already agreed to work on a memorandum of understanding that would guide both entities as they collaborate to achieve their shared objective. And this collaboration would ensure the effective functioning of the Marrakesh Treaty for VIPs in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, NALIS has been designated as the authorized entity to make these works accessible to the persons outlined. The amendments that we seek to make today will now empower NALIS to convert titles into formats for access without having to seek copyright permission from the publishers and copyright owners. It is hoped that it will bring us a step closer to fairness for people with print disabilities.
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Mr. Vice President, this exercise in which we are currently engaged further strengthens NALIS' ability to reach sectors of the population which might have been previously underserved. And I'm certain you would have noticed that through collaboration with the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, NALIS has embarked on a co-location project that now sees community centers in Mount Hope and Barataria being outfitted with full service. Similarly, through another collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Interagency Task Force, we also now have a library located on the Beetham Estate. And these community libraries are serving as homework centers, neutral spaces for community gatherings, spaces for health and career fairs, spaces for community entrepreneurs to showcase their goods and talents. Passage of these proposed amendments would thus ensure that another category of citizens, our visually impaired and print handicapped citizens, now have both equality and equity when it comes to matters of literacy. Because that's the thing about books. They allow all of us, sighted and unsighted, to travel the world equally without leaving home. And these proposed amendments place all citizens on the same plane, and yes, the pun is intended. I urge my colleagues, both independents and opposition, to join me in giving this bill their full and unwavering support. I thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It is indeed a pleasure to stand here and contribute on this bill. Mr. Vice President, I think the words of the Minister of Communications echo a lot of the sentiments that I stood here to raise. I'm not in the habit of detaining this House unnecessarily, so I have 3 points in relation to the bill. But as we look at the legislation that is before us and we discuss the issue of accessibility and improving and increasing accessibility to literary works and to those who are blind, visually impaired, and otherwise print disabled, I had the opportunity to reflect upon my own life, Mr. Vice President. If I had to choose one thing that has had the most profound impact on my development, on what I've been able to accomplish in life thus far, it would have been my access to the classics, having been an avid reader my entire life. It is in no small way, Mr. Vice President, that having access to vast amounts of literature, being able to read widely, has created for me a space that I've always seen wide and limitless potential in this world, Mr. Vice President. And to stand in a bill, to support a bill, and we do support this piece of legislation that is before us, because we've always said, once there is good law that benefits the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you would always find support from the United National Congress. So we do, in fact, support the legislation that is before us. It gives me great pleasure to know that persons who would not have ordinarily had access, who may not have seen the world as limitless and full of potential and full of hope, as those of us who, without even thinking about it, was able to visualize a world like that, Mr. Vice President, it gives me great pleasure. But oftentimes, the work that we do here in Parliament, when you go out into wider Trinidad and Tobago, those of us who, and it happens particularly in the political arena, would go out and meet people, you would hear, but we didn't know you all did that. We didn't know that was a thing. And there is an alarming disconnect between what we do here, what we are able to accomplish, and the services across the board that the citizens who are meant to benefit, who this is intended to help, what they know of and what they have access to. So while we all support the bill, and we all could stand here collectively and say what is laudable about it, I want to urge the government, and key in this bill, Mr. Vice President, is that it is a culmination of years of work. So when I urge the government, I'm urging any government that may be in power to be aware of ensuring that there is wide public sensitization of what we did here today. Don't let us pass the legislation, pat ourselves on the back, talk about accessibility, and then people don't know about it. And therefore, what is the accessibility if you didn't know what we did here today? And this question of access to information goes even wider into the conversation of copyright, Mr. Vice President, because a number of senators here today raised topics about how we can go further and what people would be looking for in terms of protection of their intellectual property. And I looked, before presenting here today, at the website of the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, Mr. Vice President, and I think there's a space there that would allow for the public education conversation on these things to begin. I would like to humbly suggest that as we consider a robust public education and sensitization campaign to ensure that the accessibility that we are seeking to give reaches those who are most in need, that we keep in mind the target audience, who we are intending to reach, and therefore designed our communications targeted at our audience, our particular audience. Oftentimes, Mr. Vice President, you find those persons who are in rural communities. So let's think it through. You have persons who may be disabled and living in rural communities, never knowing what any government, any political entity would have created the space for them to access, because you're left out of the communication loop. So the Minister of Communication spoke about work and moving into community centers, and I think that's a very good idea and something that ought to continue. Because if you are in the communities, all of the communities in Trinidad and Tobago, and you take your education, not just online, but you take them into the communities, I think you would find a robust national change. You would get more people involved. The accessibility and inclusivity that we're talking about here today would reach the widest number of people, and it makes no sense that we sit and contribute to legislation, but then we don't do the real-time work of making the legislation applicable to the lives of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, when Senator Vera was speaking, and Senator Dialsing as well, we are looking at a changing globe. We are in a space now where even if our intention was not to innovate, we must do so now. We are looking at creating spaces for persons, for professions, for things that we may not even be able to imagine right now. And this piece of legislation, amongst others that I'm sure will come, that would design an efficient, balanced intellectual property space, would lead to great amounts of innovation for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President. And I raised that in the context of the United National Congress has already stated in our National Economic Transformation Plan a space for the creative arts and building out a robust sector. And to do so, you need to ensure that you have this efficient, robust intellectual property system. And so, again, just to reiterate, as I close, Mr. Vice President, key in this is that when you do good work in the Parliament, ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are aware of their rights, responsibilities, under the work in the work that we would have done. And let us continue, I think, to put the best interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago at the center of everything that we do, and you will always see the same kind of cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to bring conclusion to this debate. And as a matter of housekeeping, I again, for yet another week, implore the utilization of a desk at the side, please. It is extremely difficult for the pilot of a motion with multiple papers to operate at the podium. And also, I pray for a clock so that I don't have to lean back or forward to keep trying to figure out what time is left in the debate. So thank you for allowing me to address those yet again week after week. I know the Parliament is trying its best, but it's a little difficult. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I wish to say with a solid amount of heartfelt gratitude that today is really a very unique day in the Senate. It's unique because whereas opposition and government, because of the revolving door position of government sometimes turning, can often lay claim to the paternity of legislation, it's very rare that an independent senator can lay true paternity to legislation. And I really want to say that I am so very pleased on behalf of the government to thank Senator Vera for his outstanding work for Trinidad and Tobago, as it's the first time that 3 benches in the Senate can lay claim to some aspects of paternity. And I think that the nation needs to understand the luck that we have in having a very strong specialist mind in this area with us. So thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to say that, and on behalf of us all, to Senator Vera for his solid contribution to Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, the aim of the legislation is also met with another extremely important, I should say, difference. And Senator Rambarat put it on the record. It's very rare that we don't have Senator Mark crying about the 3/5 majority aspects of legislation. And today I really do find it noteworthy that we're on the same page that this law ought to be supported. Lest I had the opportunity to invoke the Surat principle, as again fate would have it, in accepting the application of a Section 13 of the Constitution for 3/5 majorities, because it is Kenneth Surat himself who is the litigant that has appeared on our records at the Privy Council as laying down the law that you don't always need a 3/5 majority for certain legislation. And I thank Mr. Surat not only for his advocacy on behalf of the visually impaired and print disabled in this country, but for just the sheer stick-to-itiveness that he has engaged in tirelessly for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, alongside the other members of the Blind Welfare Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, as I welcome incoming Madam President, it is important for us to underscore the human rights aspect of our legislation. And I thank all honorable members for recognizing the very strong legitimate aim in the human rights aspect. And I want us to remember that it is especially in times such as these, in difficult situations where the world is called upon to adopt new normals, that human rights has really become a very relevant thing in our country. After all, we are witnessing acts of heroism, of bravery, as I join in saluting our nurses today on International Nursing Day, alongside remarkable acts of human kindness in the face of sincere difficulty. After all, it has become the new norm to look to feed as many people as we can and to share as many resources as we can as a whole of society operation, Madam President, in this COVID pandemic situation. The position of law really is quite simple. I think we're all agreed that the legitimate aim of the legislation is well-founded in the Marrakesh and Beijing conventions. I am pleased to say that I can confirm that the Beijing Convention is now operational, that they have passed the 30 members required to achieve muster, so we're no longer in an hypothetical situation of looking to underwrite the economic and moral rights of performers in their widest sense, and yes, Senator Mark, including comedians, as you had asked, but it is in fact law. So that is international law. We make it local law in our dualistic experience of legislative making by bringing the treaty conventions into the copyright amendments that we do today by this. So we're taking our accession to the international platform, we're bringing it into local law by making the amendments to the Copyright Act that we do today. It is very important, therefore, to look at two aspects that were raised by Senator Vera as it relates to the bill itself. Senator Vera raised, quite importantly, the definition of broadcasting and also the definition of communication to the public as it appears in Clause 3 of the bill. With respect to the definition of communication in public, we have a proposed amendment to that, which would hopefully capture the concern that my learned colleague has raised. We are proposing that in that definition, we delete the words wire or wireless, means, including the making available to the public of images or sound or both of a work performance or sound recording, and that we substitute the words any medium of the visual images or sounds or both of a work, performance or sound recording, including making availability thereof. We'll circulate these amendments shortly. I asked and we confirmed with the WIPO itself the look at the definition of broadcasting. Broadcasting, as it's defined in the bill, includes right now a technological specificity. Broadcasting is the communication of visual images, sounds, or both to the public in any country or territory by wireless transmissions. And if I underscore the wireless transmission, the thought came about whether we should go for the expression by any means. We've cross-checked a number of jurisdictions, and so far, the recommendation coming from the Controller of Intellectual Property is that we should stay within the boundaries of the precedent that other jurisdictions have, lest we find ourselves in a novel situation with claims that come otherwise. I give the undertaking to honorable members of the Senate, and in particular, through you, Madam President, to Senator Vera, that we have asked the WIPO legislative team to bless the concept that we're looking at. If they come back to us and tell us that we are green-lighted in stepping outside the precedent, we will of course come back to the Parliament and look to massage the definition away from technological specificity, which at present means wireless. So I hope that my learned colleague will accept that undertaking and that we can keep within precedent for now. Madam President, Senator Obika and certainly Senator Sobers raised the issue of collective management of rights. And it's true, Madam President, that when we're looking to collective management organizations and rights issues, the whole, do I subscribe to COT or is it another management organization? There's quite a bit of confusion in the marketplace on that. Indeed, the courts have the ability to be invited to consider issues of law, and certainly that's where we go. But as a larger mechanism, I can tell you that I personally met with the Deputy Director of WIPO, Sylvie Forbin, in January 2019 at the Attorney General's office, and we confirmed a number of things, including the fact that WIPO is addressing the CMO issue, the collective management issue, by way of a regional project. What we're doing is we are looking at collective management organizations. We're ensuring that there's ongoing regulation for the entire Caribbean region. And WIPO has, in fact, commissioned a project for regulatory approach. The local consultant is Dr. James, and Dr. Koo has been also engaged alongside with our team to create the regulations for CMO issues. That will take us a long way to achieve two purposes. One, Trinidad and Tobago capturing, as we battle with our beloved brothers and sisters in Jamaica, capturing the IT capital of the Caribbean, because this government has a very strong diversification platform which is rooted in technology. It's why, Madam President, as Attorney General, I am able to say with pride on behalf of the whole of government that we have birthed electronic payments in the government, not statutory authorities like TNTech, etc., the government. And the pilot project for that was not only the Registrar General's division, but it also, very importantly, was the IP agency, our IP office, the Intellectual Property Office, which comes under the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. We cut the cloth on that ground, and we very fortunately received the assistance of WIPO in using their filing technology and software. So we use their program. We have brought the regulations to do the electronic payments in the whole of government structure. We are replicating that across the whole of government structures: passport division, motor vehicle and licensing authority, registration of deeds. Come up in a matter of the month of June, we are now in May, where we will be, all things being equal and getting the green light from our developers, in a position to operationalize online filing for deeds. Similarly, for companies' documents, as we have birthed an entirely new registry. I should say, Madam President, without tripping the rules of anticipation, when we're looking to the registration of deeds amendments, we have birthed the technology for that already. And no law is ever intended, as Senator Haynes raised it, under this government to be operationalized without the technology to make it work. Plant and machinery, people, processes, and law must be coincidental. As a matter of interest, I can tell you, Madam President, I was today made aware of communication coming from the Law Association relative to certain legislation that we contemplated. That communication was not brought to my attention. I was unaware that they had sent in submissions. They all have my number. They talk to me on a constant basis. They call me for personal reasons. I didn't receive a call alerting me to concerns. Had I received a call, I would have happily met them immediately to discuss issues so that we can get to the point.
Attorney General, I just need to bring you back to the matter at hand because you're treating with something that is not on the matter. Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm tying it in, if I may, now to Senator Haynes's contribution as to operationalization of this law. And I'm giving the comparator, and I think I really ought to be a little bit tighter in the relevance. I'm giving the comparator of all laws under this government, and this law in particular, will only be operationalized, these amendments, when the technology is ready alongside plant and machinery, people, processes, and law, as we have demonstrated a full commitment to engage in consultations for operationalization. It applies to every law that we draft, be it amendments to professions, to other structures. The Office of the Attorney General, and in particular as it relates to intellectual property, is wide open. And that is because, Madam President, we have a very efficient team. And I'd like to say that it is the Controller of Intellectual Property, Reagan Ascarali, his predecessor in title, the many people that are alongside as consultants and persons, Mr. Richard Atching, etc. These are the lions that carry the name of Trinidad and Tobago with pride, because the WIPO recognizes us as a front runner in the intellectual property arena. As we birth the moral rights and economic rights to performers, as we anchor in the derivatives for the Marrakesh Convention on the adaptation of literary works, of the general copyright privileges that prevail and spring from the Berne Convention, we are sure that we are in safe hands with these our people. Permit me to put on the record, Madam President, that there is a huge resource. Senator Haynes raised the issue of making sure that the law is operational and that people are aware of the law. I just want to put that into some context in the consideration of this legislation. NALIS and the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association, in fact, already under our hand, under this AG's hand, executed the Memorandum of Understanding between them. Specifically, we're bringing to life NALIS's role, because Section 4M of the NALIS legislation, and what is NALIS? The National Library and Information Systems Authority, which is created by an Act of Parliament. Section 4M says that NALIS is to provide a national information service for the benefit of the physically disadvantaged and persons in institutions. And this amendment of the law by this legislation ties into that. So we're operationalizing it by the execution of an MOU, but here's what we get. NALIS and the Trinidad and Tobago Blind Welfare Association have the ability, because of the parity of laws amongst Marrakesh Convention countries, to engage in WIPO's Accessible Books Consortium, ABC, Accessible Books Consortium. And that program is an online catalog which allows participating libraries for the blind and organizations serving VIPs to access books in accessible formats, some 415,000 books for VIPs. Let me repeat that. 500,000 books for VIPs, where at present, the VIPs, the visually impaired persons in our country, are in a state of book famine. The passage of this law allows us to open that avenue immediately to nearly 500,000 books on record. Obviously, all of our local books in which copyright exists, texts for the advancing of general education, be it at primary school education, secondary school, tertiary, our local authors as part of the school curriculum now have the ability to join in this access to visually impaired persons, and that therefore amplifies our position. One of the key underpinnings to our country is to exploit, the same way we do oil and gas, our natural talent, our intellectual property positioning. We have the ability to be the Singapore of this region, certainly as it relates to patent corporation management, certainly as it relates to trademark and geographic indications, certainly as it relates to industrial designs, certainly as it relates to neighboring rights and collective management, certainly as it relates to the broadening in our film industry as we have it, of the economic potential to have by way of fixation of audiovisual performances, as this bill clearly is designed to capture. This government has the ability, having already brought to life electronic payments, electronic filings, as that goes into the stratosphere in the month of May, this month, with the abolition of the old system for motor vehicle and road traffic offenses, as we launch the U-turn system and you get your ticket in the mail and fixed penalties are managed that way, that ties into the whole intellectual property structure that we're engaged in here. In other words, then, our Parliament's time has been well spent over the last 4.5 years in driving the legislative products that we have and in birthing the new Trinidad and Tobago. But Madam President, what better time could there have been than now? Lo and behold, as we stand in the middle of a pandemic, we take it for granted that we can go to court electronically. We take it for granted that we can have audio-visual fixation. But these things have only become because this Parliament and this government had the foresight to pass the laws to bring this into effect. Could you imagine, as it relates to this bill, that we had not acceded to the Rome Convention, even though our Copyright Act encapsulates the Rome Convention basic elements and more? It is inconceivable that we could not have acceded to the Rome Convention, or the Marrakesh, or the Beijing, or the Singapore. And therefore, I would like to say that it gives me great pleasure, Madam President, to manage this position as the Minister with responsibility, as you once were, Madam President, yourself as a Minister of Legal Affairs, to manage this responsibility for intellectual property in Trinidad and Tobago, because it is our salvation. We have taken our dependence on oil and gas in terms of diversification away from that plantation estate into other sectors, including intellectual property. We have come down from 51% oil and gas contribution to our GDP to where that now stands at 27% under this regime, under this government. And in those circumstances, this bill is well positioned to make the difference, Madam President, to the lives of so many people, be they the visually impaired or physically challenged, as it relates to manipulation of works, simple literary or artistic works, or be they in the economic improvement of the welfare and lives of our performers in their fixed or unfixed works, as audiovisual works can be, live performances or fixed in recordings, and certainly as it relates to moral rights. Why? In this world of fake news, moral rights stand paramount, even though we cannot yet get the support of certain members of society for amendments to cybercrime laws, for instance, to treat with fake news. Even though we can't catch that, this legislation, this bill, takes us one step in that direction, because now a performer who a sick parody is put upon, a meme, an arrangement, that performer now has a moral right to insist that that cannot be done, and therefore you have an alternative remedy, Madam President, to things that we just can't pass. Other countries have the laws against fake news and protection, etc. We in Trinidad and Tobago, regrettably, because of the 3/5 majority requirements, cannot achieve that, but one can only live in hope. Madam President, there are a few other small amendments. Some are typographical that we wish to circulate around. We propose amendments to Clause 3, as we have indicated with respect to communications to the public. We propose an amendment to authorized entity, which is largely just to make sense of the language as put there. We propose an amendment to Clause 8. This is, again, a typographical aspect. We propose an amendment to Clause 9, which is a cross-reference amendment. Madam President, it's a good day for us to celebrate a good work done. With good luck, we can have support at the committee stage. I welcome the submissions that may come there. I regret that I don't have a procedure with me to take us to the next stage, but I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to public works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances be read a second time. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
An act to amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 66-1, I beg to move that a bill entitled the Copyright Amendment Bill 2019 be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled the Copyright Amendment Bill 2019 be committed to a committee of the whole Senate forthwith to be considered clause by clause. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate shall now go into committee of the whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Honourable Senators, the amendments circulated on behalf of the Attorney General. Is everyone in receipt of their document? Attorney General. Honourable Senators, may I remind you that there are 12 clauses in the bill as we proceed to the committee deliberations. May I just point out to members who are in other parts of the building the amendments and looking on to the proceedings and trying to follow it. The amendments have been put on your desk, so you can come in and retrieve it and then follow it from whichever part of the building you are. Okay?
Clauses 1 and 2.
The question is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 1 and 2 now stand part of the bill.
Clause 3.
The question is that clause 3 stand part of the bill. Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, consequent upon recommendations coming from Senator Vera at committee stage, we looked at the definition of broadcasting, which I've addressed in my winding up, and also to the definition of communication to the public. And we have proposed that we defer the consideration of the definition of broadcasting for now, but that we do take avail of the comments made and cause an amendment to broadcasting in terms circulated. This would take us away from the technological specificity of wire or wireless and allow us to convey communication to the public in any medium. And that, of course, would speak for itself. It's just quite simple that the technology can evolve over time and that therefore we ought to capture it that way. And I thank Senator Vera for that recommendation. In the paragraph E, we're proposing deletion of the definition of authorized entity and a substitution of it instead to read as circulated here. If we look to authorized entity, it really was just improperly stated. And what we're proposing here in authorized entity, the bill has it as means National Library and Information Systems Authority or an entity designated by Act of Parliament. What we had to do was to give the correct reference as it is described at law. Authorized entity means the National Library and Information Systems Authority established under Section 3 of the National Library and Information Systems Act. And therefore, the marginal note reference, as you normally see it, to that Act of Parliament kicks in on the side. So this is to correct a simple drafting error where we didn't make full reference to the law that created NALIS per se. That's it for clause 3. Should it please you?
Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask the Honourable Attorney General, at what stage or would we need to get guidance from WIPO as it relates to...
Difficulty hearing you.
Okay, I'll throw my voice. No, I was making a point to the Honourable Attorney General. At what point would we, as parliamentarians and lawmakers, be able to consider a redefinition or an expansion of the concept of work of mass. Now, I know it is not before us, but I just am putting it on the record because I'm saying to you that our creativity has been exploited and we are not getting the kind of royalty payments in return. And it has to do with the narrow definition that currently exists in the Copyright Act. So I raise this for your consumption, and maybe at some later time, you can probably advise Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Attorney General, you wish to respond?
Of course, I see Senator Vera also eager to jump in here. We're actually treating with it now because what we're doing is we're broadening the moral and economic rights for performers, and performers relate to works of mass. So if I put it quite simply, Trinidad is unique in that we recognize as a category of works. Now, arguably, a work could be anything that meets the criterion of copyright. But in our legislation, we drafted it to include a work of mass, which is a very novel thing in and of itself, right? So to answer your question specifically, the amendments that we do now by bringing in the Beijing concepts, they broaden those economic potential rights and, in fact, moral rights as well. It provides an interesting opportunity to manage the exploitation of our works of mass, and certainly by the reciprocity of WIPO arrangements with other Beijing treaties and the general reciprocity of laws, we can treat with that. But I'm sure my friend Senator Vera would have a point of view on this as well.
Senator Vera.
Chair. Well, first of all, work of mass is not a form of copyright. It's what is called a derivative work. So in a work of mass, you may have several different copyright owners all sharing in the production of that work of mass. Secondly, it's not every piece of carnival that will qualify as a work of mass. There are a number of criteria that must be present for it to qualify. So it was a very bold initiative to go that route, but it's still a work in progress in many respects. And as the Honorable Attorney General has pointed out, this legislation is going to really give a lot more protection to works of mass that do qualify as such.
So, Honorable Senators, the question is that Clause 3 be amended as circulated. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The question is that Clause 3, as amended, now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 3, as amended, now stands part of the bill.
Clause 4.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clause 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 4 now stands part of the bill.
Clauses 5 and 6.
The question is that clauses 5 and 6 stand part of the bill? Yes. Senator Mark?
Yeah. To the Honorable Attorney General. Attorney General, when I looked at the NALIS legislation, you look at Clause 30, you will realize that NALIS has a responsibility to submit to the appropriate minister a report, and 28 days after, that report would be tabled in the Parliament. I am concerned about Clause 5 as it relates to all these responsibilities of NALIS at this time, including expenditure, and also the establishment of procedures in order to ensure that accessible format copies are used only by beneficiary persons. Would we be getting in this annual report these elements here, so that we as a parliament would be able to have some oversight on this matter of copyright, the responsibility of NALIS as it relates to the Mauritius the Marrakesh treaty. I'm not too clear, and I'm seeking clarification on this matter.
Attorney General.
Sure, I thank Senator Mark. If I were to strip down the idea, I think it's accountability for the adaptation of somebody else's work pursuant to this clause to make sure that somebody's giving account of it. And I think it's a point well taken, Senator. So yes, I can't see why the NALIS reporting system would not have it, but in any event, the intellectual property aspect of the AG's office and in the AG's reports, we will actually have those covered as well. Because WIPO is going to be managing this in a very serious way. The near 500,000 reference copies that we have from the ABC, the book consortium that WIPO does, has to be managed. Now, the definition of, and this is in clause 5, when you look to the definition, you'll note that the adaptation right is really contingent upon a very specific thing, You have to have lawful access to it. Now, that's a term that has not been defined, nor is it defined in the Marrakesh Treaty or in the other comparative legislative points that we went through. So it isn't that you just pick up somebody's work and press on with it. There must be an arrangement for lawful access by NALIS to it. So NALIS is the authorized entity. The access has a qualifying aspect. It must be lawful, and therefore there's a safeguard inside of there which must be policed, hence your question, by an entity. The controller of intellectual property does that. The copyright laws will prevail in relation to that. WIPO would have a hand in that because there are the arrangements for adaptation that come by way of the lawful access. So it isn't just a blank check. There has to be point. And to answer your question specifically, AG's office and also NALIS will no doubt have, in addition to WIPO's regional operation, elements of production that will account for that.
Yeah, the only reason I'm raising this, Madam Chair, is that we would like to know, given what the AG has indicated, over 500,000 publications would be accessible to the blind and the visually impaired. And we'd like to know on an annual basis what is being done once this thing becomes law and has been operationalized. So we can say, well, look, in the year 2022 or 2021, the 20,000 blind people in our country were able to access what percentage, what number of publication. So we'll have information and therefore monitor the progress. But I'm not too sure, Madam Chair, where that will come from. Because the AG is saying it may come from his office, it may come from NALIS. But I am asking specifically, Madam Chair, whether that is included in Section 30 of NALIS Act. So we would hold them to account.
So Madam Chair, the answer is yes. As we add more and more functions to the entities who have a statutory responsibility to report as they do, NALIS being one of them, the AG's office being one of them, as we have that responsibility in gear, they must report on such functions as they are given over time. So that will be one of them. But I was hoping to give you some comfort by reporting that it's not only NALIS alone, as you've referred to. NALIS, intellectual property, controller, and WIPO, in a general sense, will all have those reporting assets.
So, Honourable Senators, the question is that clauses 5 and 6 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 5 and 6 now stand part of the bill.
Clause 7.
The question is that clause 7 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 7 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 7 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 8.
The question is that clause 8 stand part of the bill. Attorney General.
Madam Chair, thank you. We propose an amendment as circulated. In paragraph A, Roman 3, capital B, we are looking to delete the words of the original and substitute the words the original. The word of was not intended to be there. So it's just simply to remove that word, and it just was to make sense of the language.
The question is that clause 8 be amended as circulated. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Honourable Senators, the question is that clause 8 as amended now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 8 as amended now stands part of the bill.
Clause 9.
The question is that clause 9 stand part of the bill. Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We inadvertently omitted the subclause. So we had said on page 12, paragraph B, at the top line you see in subsection 3 is what it currently says. It really ought to have been section 3A, A as in apple. And therefore we seek to correct that cross-referencing into the way it's supposed to be, and that's the rationale for the amendment.
Honourable Senators, the question is that clause 9 be amended as circulated. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The question is that clause 9 as amended now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 9 as amended now stands part of the bill.
Clauses 10 to 12.
The question is that clauses 10 to 12 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 10 to 12 now stand part of the bill. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 10 to 12 now stand part of the bill. Preamble.
Preamble.
The question is that the preamble to the bill be approved. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The preamble to the bill is approved. Honourable Senators, the question is that the bill as amended be now reported to the Senate. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill as amended will now be reported to the Senate. Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to report that a bill entitled the Copyright Amendment Bill 2019 was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved with amendments. I now beg to move that the Senate agree with the committee's report.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate agree with the committee's report on a bill entitled the Copyright Amendment Bill 2019. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Attorney General.
Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled an Act to amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access. Oh. Madam President, I'm perfectly on track. I'm aware. The third reading division comes at the end of what I say.
That's correct. Attorney, just continue.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. May I begin again, please? Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled an Act to amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances be read a third time and passed.
Honourable Senators, the question is that a bill entitled an Act to amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on Audiovisual Performances be now read a third time and passed. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Honourable Senators, as you are aware, this bill requires a 3/5 majority, so the clerk will therefore now conduct a division. Honourable Senators, we'll just wait for 3 minutes to make sure that everyone is where they're supposed to be.
Mrs. Batiste Primus,
Yes, with pleasure.
Mr. Robert,
Yes.
Mr. Sinanan,
Yes.
Mr. Moses,
Yes.
Mr. Hussain,
Yes.
Ms. West,
Yes.
Mr. Lahut,
Yes.
Ms. Cox,
Yes.
Mr. De Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Singh,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Dr. Henry,
Yes.
Mr. Duque,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Mark,
Yes.
Ms. Haynes,
Yes.
Mr. Hussain,
Yes.
Mr. Obika,
Yes.
Mr. Sobas,
Yes.
Mr. Lala,
Yes.
Mr. Richards,
Yes.
Ms. Chu,
Yes.
Mr. Vera,
Yes.
Dr. Dialsing,
Yes.
Ms. Dionaran,
Yes.
Ms. Sipasad,
Yes.
Mr. Timal,
Yes.
Mrs. Thompson, aye.
Yes.
Dr. Dylan Remy,
Yes.
Madam President, the results of the division are as follows. 30 senators voted for, 0 members voting against, and 0 abstentions.
Honourable Senators, the results of the division are as follows. 30 senators voted for the bill, no one voted against it, and no one abstained. The bill is therefore passed.
A bill entitled, An Act to Amend the Copyright Act, Chapter 8280, to give effect to the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled, and to the Beijing Treaty on audiovisual performances.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to tomorrow, Wednesday, May 13, 2020, at 10 a.m. Government intends to deal with the bill for an act to amend the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 4850. I thank you.
With your leave, we were advised, as you would recall, your record would show, that we were supposed to deal with 2 bills, copyright and the miscellaneous. So we all prepared for that. When we were expecting the second bill to be debated today, the government has abandoned that bill and just sprung a surprise on us that we are going to deal with motor vehicles at the same time tomorrow. I think it's unfair to the senators, Madam Chair, and I spoke to him and I told him that it's unfair to us. Please.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, the government had indicated on the last occasion that today it would deal with the copyright amendment bill, which we have dealt with, and the registration of deeds bill. During the sitting earlier this morning, it was brought to our attention that our colleagues on the other two benches had a meeting with the Law Association in relation to the bill that was earmarked for the debate, the registration of deeds bill. We were subsequently provided with a letter from the Law Association, a 23-page letter. The AG has had a look at the letter, and in fairness to our colleagues on both benches, we felt that we needed to give consideration to the matters raised, albeit very late, by the Law Association. We should give consideration to those matters before returning to what we intended to do. And I indicated that position to my colleagues. I had also indicated last week the possibility of dealing with the motor vehicle road traffic bill this week. Madam President, that bill was laid in this House 9 months ago and has had a long gestation period, and the government, in pursuit of the business of the country, would like to put that to the House for debate. That bill, Madam President, seeks to make radical changes, long awaited, pursued by my friends on that bench and we on this side for more than 2 decades. It involves the registration of vehicles using computerized technology. It involves a number of things. But most importantly, and as a continuation of what we've dealt with this morning in the copyright case, Madam President, Clause 25 of that bill proposes that for the first time in this country, a Minister of Works would make regulations which would provide in law for persons with families, special circumstances, and physical characteristics that make it difficult for them to move and walk and so on, would
Minister.
have designated parking spaces
Minister.
in public spaces.
Thank you very much.
I thank you. If only for Clause 25, Madam President.
No. Let me just say, Senator Mark, I allowed you when the adjournment question is being put. It is normally put without debate. I did allow you to raise your issue. The minister has responded. May I also point out that once something is on the order paper, it can be debated. And may I also point out that when matters are said at the end of when the acting leader says that these are the matters, it's a matter of courtesy, but there are also other matters on the order paper that can be dealt with. Okay? It is for the order of the sitting that he indicates what he wants to do on the next sitting. But we're now dealing with another sitting, which is not today. Okay? Honourable Senators, there are 2 matters on the adjournment to be before I put the question of the adjournment. Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, Point Lisas, which can be described as the virtual heartbeat of the petrochemical sector, is in trouble. Madam President, over the last few months, COVID or no COVID, we have had several plants being shut down at the Point Lisas estate. And when we analyze what has happened at Point Lisas since the arrival on the compound of this country's political corridors of the PNM, we have had, Madam President, close to 6 plants being shut down, some being closed on a permanent basis. But in the last 3 years, or the last, I would say, 2 years, we have had plants shutting down at this particular estate. The latest one was the nutrient plant, which says that it is shutting its doors for a 3-month period, and they will then look to see what will occur later on. Prior to that plant being shut down, we had Methanex announcing its Titan plant would also be experiencing shutdown. And they were blaming, of course, and it's a fact, lower prices for their commodities, which is one important factor. And Madam President, we also had Yara, Trinidad, shutting down in December, again citing lower prices and, most importantly, the inability to reach agreement on a gas price with the National Gas Company. Although the plant, it is stated, is very old and to some extent inefficient, the fact of the matter is that one of the reasons cited had to do with this high gas price. Now, Madam President, the situation at Point Lisas predates COVID-19. And these plants that have been shut can be traced back to the pricing of natural gas at the Point Lisas since early 2019, coupled with low ammonia prices, which of course have hampered the profitability of these petrochemical plants. But Madam President, what has worsened the situation, as I said, is the high and unreasonable prices that the government through NGC is calling on these plants and their owners to pay. Madam President, I would like to remind you and this Honorable House that it was on the 12th of April 2017, in a statement to this Parliament, the Honorable Prime Minister indicated that they had gone, that is himself and the Minister of National Security, who is also a minister in the office of the Prime Minister, had gone to EOG, which is the 3rd largest gas producer in Trinidad and Tobago, and they met around the table with the chairman and the CEO of EOG Resources. And they finally managed to agree on a price formula, a new price formula. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago, represented by the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security, were able, according to the statement, to arrive at a price in April of 2017 with EOG. Madam President, to compound this situation, we were told in the budget debate of October the 12th, 2017, by the Prime Minister that he had been able to narrow the gap between BP and NGC. And I quote what was stated: "Your people have been stuck with my people. Time for us to finish this matter. Madam Speaker, I am proud that I closed the gap and I brought BP from where they were and I brought NGC from where they were, and we had an agreement." So, Madam President, both in terms of two statements in the Parliament, we are being told by the Prime Minister that as it relates to gas prices, negotiations were conducted directly by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Minister of National Security in Houston, Texas. Madam President, this is the basis and one of the components of the emerging crisis at the Point Lisas estate. It is this decision by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to negotiate new gas prices with these powerful multinational corporations without the NGC involvement directly and without the kind of professional inputs coming from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, that has led to a situation at the Point Lisas plant where gas prices are beyond the reach of these petrochemical plants, companies, and owners. Madam President, the government must take direct responsibility for this development at Point Lisas. It is utter incompetence, mismanagement, and misdirection of our economy that has brought us to this stage. And they must take, that is the government, must take full responsibility for this. And Madam President, in those circumstances, we believe that the time has come for the government to renegotiate those packages with EOG, BP, because it is not helping our country. It is hurting our country. It is hurting Point Lisas and all our industries there, which is impacting on this country's foreign exchange, impacting on employment levels, and, Madam President, our capacity to generate the kind of resources necessary, particularly in this period of COVID-2019, is glaring for all to see. Therefore, the government, led by the Prime Minister and his Minister of National Security, who negotiated directly, must take responsibility for the crisis that currently facing the Point Lisas industrial estate at this time, Madam President. I thank you very much.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I was very patient and I was waiting for Senator Mark to set out the failure of the government to formulate and publicly articulate a plan of action for the growing uncertainty surrounding the operations of the petrochemical plants at Point Lisas. So, what I've heard three things in particular. One, Senator Mark is conflating several unrelated matters, and I will deal with that. The second, Madam President, is that there's been absolutely no evidence of a failure by the government to articulate a plan for any aspect of business in Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular, the energy sector. Madam President, it is that exact thing that Senator Mark tries to attack today. The fact that the Prime Minister, the head of the government's business and the handling of the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, led the delegations which went to meet with the principal players in the energy sector who are based outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And there's several ways in which I could demonstrate the connectivity between the government and the energy sector, but I'll just use one. For example, last week, we had been hearing about nationals of Trinidad and Tobago involved in the energy sector, but working outside of Trinidad and Tobago, being caught up in the closure of the border. And it was at that press conference on April 27, 2020, that the Minister of National Security articulated that it was in discussions with the energy sector that a decision has been made to return some of those nationals to Trinidad and Tobago, to allow them to enter in a particular way, and to afford them the opportunity to meet the requirements of the COVID regulations in being quarantined, and of course, through the process, being brought back to their regular life in the country. So there's no absence of plans or discussions or connectivity to the energy sector. And the third thing I would say is that this is just a continuation of that worn-out narrative that the Prime Minister negotiated energy contracts with the players in the local sector who are based outside. It is very clear, Madam President, the question has been articulated and answered in many, many ways in this House and elsewhere, that all the expert advice was available to the team. Some cases, the members were there. Some cases, they were in positions to support, and that is an old narrative that has nothing to do with the decision of Nutrien to shut down one of its plants. Senator Mark says very loosely that they have shut down their plants. It's one of the plant. And on this matter of the gas contracts, Madam President, it is well known in the country that the government has successfully negotiated those contracts. And maybe I should articulate it a little clearer so my friend will understand. And I say this, Madam President, early in the tenure of this government, the government engaged major upstream suppliers of gas to ensure that gas curtailment would be minimized, if not eliminated. Upstream companies responded with increased investment in the subsurface, and several projects came on stream, such as Angeline and Troc, and discoveries such as Savannah and Macadamia. In the near term, BP will bring on stream Cassia Tree, Matapal, Sip, Ginger, and Jasmine. Shell will be bringing on stream the Barracuda and Colibri. EOG is seeking to improve production in East Manzanilla and SECC, and Touchstone is due to start production soon. In fact, Madam President, I could say for a fact that last week, Touchstone was on the East Coast looking for accommodation for the workers who would be part of that production. As a result of the work of the government, Madam President, there has been an increase in natural gas production. An increase. Over the last 2 years, production has averaged 3.6 BCF per day and has reached as high as 3.9 BCF per day. Production has been demand-driven and has fluctuated with the downtime of downstream and LNG plants. Downtime largely, Madam President, given the nature of the industry, for plant maintenance. Hence, there is a differential with peak production. Over the next 3 years, gas production is expected to be in excess of 3.8 BCF per day. On the gas supply contract that my friend has referred to, Madam President, government through NGC, has put in place new gas supply contracts with the upstream operators, Shell, BHP, BPTT, De Novo, and EOG. De Novo, one of the new players to come on stream, Madam President. These new contractual arrangements have occasioned an improved security of supply of natural gas, and NGC has been meeting its contractual obligations to downstream industries. Madam President, most importantly, in these new gas supply contracts with the upstream, natural gas prices to NGC have in fact increased. To mitigate the effects of natural gas prices, higher natural gas prices, NGC has done significant work and continues to work assiduously with the downstream customers to optimize plant efficiency and the use of gas molecules by all customers. Additionally, Madam President, the securing of new upstream gas supply contracts has led to improved stability of the supply with less cycling of plants and greater operational certainty. Indeed, Madam President, it is through NGC that the government has accepted significantly lower margins from the sale of gas downstream in an effort to share some of the burden currently facing the sector. So that is a deliberate plan of the government, Madam President. That is not indicative of failure to formulate or failure to articulate. That is indicative of an understanding of the sector, an understanding of what needs to be done on the upstream side and the downstream side to give up some revenue on the upstream side and to facilitate the downstream through NGC by creating the opportunities while also accepting a lower margin. And that is a strategy. The downstream companies, Madam President, have taken on board a new pricing environment, and to date, NGC has renewed 4 gas supply contracts with CNC, N2000, Nutrien, and PLNL. And NGC have interim gas supply arrangements with 2 other customers, MHTL and Tringen 1 and 2. And these arrangements, the 4 downstream contracts already executed and the interim arrangements accounts for over 65% of the plants at Point Lisa's industrial estate. NGC continues to work with the downstream companies with contracts expiring and renewal discussions are progressing. But I want to say most importantly, Madam President, that what is happening right now with the companies in the estate, the petrochemical plants, relates to what is happening globally in relation to COVID-19. With a significant portion of the world's population at home, plants around the world across industries being shut down, air traffic at its lowest level, motor vehicular traffic at its lowest level, Madam President, all those things have disrupted the energy sector in a way that is unimaginable. So as a consequence of that, what is happening right now is related to COVID-19. It is not related to the failure of the government to negotiate properly, to be advised and so on. In fact, Madam President, I would say that we are in the good position that we are placed in on account of the work that has gone in, led of course by the Honorable Prime Minister. So 2 plants have shut down, Methanex, and 1 section of Nutrien. In both cases, Madam President, the workers have been absorbed in other operations.
Your time is up.
And I thank you very much, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the matter of the shortfall in the supply of potable water to many communities in this country is another manifestation of failure of this outgoing administration. Madam President, during a crisis of the proportions that we are all witnessing, that is COVID-19 pandemic, when we are being called upon to be more hygienic and to practice proper sanitation in terms of ensuring that your hands are washed, and of course everything is done in a manner that could avoid you coming into contact and contracting this deadly and invisible enemy and virus. We still in Trinidad and Tobago, in many communities, particularly in South and Central, and even part of the north of our nation, citizens are still without water. Right in Belmont, people have not had water, Madam President, for weeks. In Port of Spain, Belmont is a part of the city of Port of Spain, and the people are crying out for water in Belmont and Gonzales. And those are the communities, Madam President. The government has failed to manage the water situation throughout our country properly, particularly in this period of COVID-19. Madam President, this has resulted in a poor and inconsistent supply of pipe-borne water in all areas of our country, particularly over the last 6 weeks, leaving several communities with little option as it relates to an alternative supply. During a time, Madam President, when children and their parents are at home, at a time when water is needed more than ever, at a time when there is an increased consumption of water at homes throughout our country. And therefore, large segments of the population continue to suffer on a daily basis with absolutely no relief in sight as it relates to the insufficiency and inadequacy of supply, Madam President. Madam President, this, as we know, water that is a basic and vital necessity of life. And as we are told, Madam President, you can put a cost on water, but you cannot put a cost on life, because water literally is life. And therefore, Madam President, in some communities where they are scheduled to receive water once a week for 24 hours, sometimes, Madam President, a week would pass, that one day of the week will pass, and citizens are still not in receipt, do not get their supply of water. Truck-borne supply are supposed to be substituted when they don't have it in the pipe, Madam President, through the water mains, and yet still even that is not being made available to communities. That is regular truck-borne water supply. So I have raised this matter today to emphasize the need for this government to pay much more attention, I should say, to this matter of water and its widespread shortfall, which is unacceptable, Madam President, and especially, as I said, in this period where we are experiencing a health crisis in our nation as it relates to COVID-19. Madam President, access to water is very, very limited in many of our communities that are prone to health hazards, Madam President. And I'm calling on the Honorable Minister of Public Utilities, who I know is the vice chairman of this recovery, so-called recovery committee, Madam President, to really come clean with this situation as it relates to the people of our country who are indeed experiencing very, very difficult moments during this crisis as it relates to a potable water supply in their respective communities, Madam President. Water shortages, Madam President, remain extremely serious in many, many areas and parts of our nation. And therefore, this matter is brought to the attention of this Honorable Senate so that we can get some answers from the relevant authorities, in this instance, the Minister of Public Utilities, as to what measures are being taken to address this water shortfall that is impacting, as I said, Madam President, on several communities throughout our country, particularly in the north, in the central, and certainly even in parts of Port of Spain. And therefore, I call on the Minister to provide us with an account of this particular tragedy that is confronting our society, and to tell us what measures are being taken by the government to bring about an ease in this water crisis affecting several communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam President.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Following the announcement on March the 12th, 2020, of the first COVID-19 case in Trinidad and Tobago, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago took immediate steps to reduce the spread of the virus throughout the country. Consistent with the Ministry of Health's mandate to reduce the risk of the transmission of COVID-19 virus, measures were implemented, including social distancing. However, one of the primary guidelines articulated to prevent the spread of the virus was and continued to be to wash your hands with soap and water. This has brought with it an increased need for potable water for personal hygiene purposes. I also understand and acknowledge the critical role that WASA has in providing safe and reliable water services to the citizens across Trinidad and Tobago, particularly during this time. In view of these unusual and unexpected developments, the authority has taken steps to adjust its 2020 water supply management plan in order to meet the additional demands created by COVID-19 pandemic. Madam President, if you will just allow me to digress a bit, the ability of any company, before I go into the exact plans that we have taken, the ability of any company or utility to respond to an emergency situation is directly related to the health of the company prior to the onslaught of that emergency. It is indeed very unfortunate, and I've repeatedly said in this House, that WASA, during the time of abundance financial resources, during the period 2010 to 2015, did not get the level of attention it deserved. And instead, money was wasted on pie in the sky and not thought out projects costing billions of dollars to this country without producing one drop of water. I remind this country, I've just finished an analysis of this country. To fix this water problem is going to cost over $2.2 billion. Over $1.4 billion was spent and not one drop of water. Oh, how I wish I had that money that was wasted. So WASA has found itself in a situation where we were called upon to do more with less, at a time when our revenue in the country has dropped by almost 30 to 40%, We are now being called upon to fix a problem which should have been fixed a long time ago when money was wasted, 1.4 billion, over 60% of what it will cost to fix the water. All that being said, WASA, mindful of its responsibility, has implemented its business continuity plan, which involves alternative work arrangements with a view to ensure the uninterrupted operations of its critical facilities. In keeping with public health regulations and World Health Organization guidelines, this has permitted an uninterrupted operations of water and wastewater infrastructure in the delivery of services to the population, particularly with respect to the delivery of water. Some of the steps taken involves the following: the redistribution of water from unaffected areas with high pressures to more water-stressed areas located on the periphery of the water distribution system. Water supply schedules are amended on an ongoing basis and published on the authority's website, Facebook, and Twitter pages. The use of water from the authority 4 main impounded reservoirs, i.e. Arena, Navet, Hollis, and Hillsborough, is closely monitored and managed to ensure a maximum water availability is produced. Measures have also been taken to ensure optimum water production from groundwater sources by closely monitoring and servicing existing well equipment. The authority continues to work closely with DesalCut, the owners of the Point Lisa's desalination plant and the Point Forte desalination plant with regard to optimizing the operations and production. Delivery of water by increasing truck-borne delivery to supplement the reduction in pipe-borne delivery is also in place. Madam President, as a result of the prevailing dry season conditions, as at the May 11, 2020, the capacity of the 3 main impounded reservoirs in Trinidad and Tobago are all below the long-term average. Arena 29.4% compared to 58.3%. Navet 38.7% compared to 54.1%. Hollis 33.6% compared to 48.32%. In addition, both the desal plants did experience challenges with high algae bloom in the Gulf of Paria, which negatively impacted production, but this situation has subsided. During the period of reduced supply, the authority made the adjustments on the distribution system to minimize the impact. For March 2020, the authority's water production on average was approximately 227 million gallons of water a day, with a maximum of 232 million gallons of water. However, there was a significant deficit in rainfall during the month of April 2020, with below more than normal amounts of rainfall. This situation has severely affected the water out of the arena, which had a deficit in rainfall of 73.5%, and in Navet with a deficit of another 73.5%. This has resulted in reduced production levels. The average production of water for the month of April was only 217 million gallons of water, with a further decline so far in May to approximately 205 million gallons of water. Climate change is really and truly upon us. This, together with the existing transmission and distribution capacities, allow approximately 90% of the population to receive water more than 2 days a week. However, the main focus is on the 10% of the population who receives a less than acceptable supply, particularly during these extending circumstances. It is also important to understand that the majority of these customers are located in elevated areas at the extremes of the pipeline distribution system, and this is further exacerbated by reduced water availability and aged pipelines infrastructure, which was not addressed when we had money to deal with it. The authority has been redistributing supplies from neighboring areas, utilizing existing transmission and distribution capacities and interconnectivity. This has been reflected in adjusted schedules in the northeast, the northwest, central, and southeast of Trinidad and Tobago. Notwithstanding these measures, there have been several communities that have experienced a less than acceptable water services during the period. Customers in the Mariaro Tableland area experienced irregularities in the pipe-borne water supply due to the distribution pipeline network constraints. These included irregular breaks on the pipelines along the Naparima-Mariaro Main Road, between New Grant and Rio Claro, which impacted supplies at Tableland and which impacted supplies in areas like Union and Mariaro, to name a few. There were also problems in central Trinidad and Tobago, but we have been working to address those problems with the installation of a new booster station and with the installation of a 300-meter pipeline, which was just recently changed.
Minister, your time is up. Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Wednesday, May the 13th, 2020 at 10 a.m. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Wednesday, May the 13th, 2020 at 10 a.m.